In the aftermath of the French and Indian War, Britain emerged victorious but burdened with significant debt. To address mounting tensions with indigenous nations and prevent further conflicts on the frontier, King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763. While ostensibly aimed at easing tensions with indigenous nations and maintaining order on the frontier, this royal proclamation ignited a firestorm of colonial discontent and rebellion. Join me as we uncover the grievances, resistance, and revolutionary fervor that simmered beneath the surface, setting the stage for one of the most transformative chapters in world history. Before starting, remember to click the like and subscribe button to support us in making more interesting videos. Colonial discontent. Colonial discontent simmered in the wake of the Proclamation of 1763, igniting a powder keg of grievances that would ultimately explode into revolution. The Proclamation, which aimed to pacify indigenous nations and stabilize the frontier, imposed significant restrictions on colonial expansion westward, effectively curtailing the ambitions of land-hungry settlers. One of the primary sources of discontent stemmed from the perceived infringement upon colonial liberties and rights. Colonists viewed the proclamation as a direct assault on their freedom to settle and prosper in the vast lands beyond the Appalachian Mountains. They saw it as an arbitrary assertion of British authority, infringing upon their natural rights as English subjects to pursue life, liberty, and property. Furthermore, the proclamation exacerbated existing tensions between colonial settlers and indigenous peoples. Many colonists harbored deep-seated prejudices and desires for expansion, viewing indigenous lands as ripe for exploitation and colonization. The prohibition on westward expansion fueled resentment among settlers who saw their economic opportunities and aspirations curtailed by British imperial policies. Colonial elites, such as merchants, planters, and lawyers, also voiced their discontent over economic grievances. The British government's imposition of taxes and trade regulations, including the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act, further strained relations between Britain and its American colonies. Colonists argued that these measures violated their rights to representation in Parliament and imposed undue burdens on their economic activities. In response to these grievances, colonial assemblies and grassroots movements emerged to challenge British authority and assert colonial autonomy. Boycotts, protests, and acts of civil disobedience became increasingly common as colonists rallied against perceived injustices and infringements upon their liberties. In essence, colonial discontent in the aftermath of the Proclamation of 1763 was fueled by a potent combination of economic, political, and social grievances. It laid the groundwork for revolutionary sentiment and set the stage for the American Revolution, a watershed moment in history that would forever alter the course of colonial America and the world. Economic grievances. Let's talk about economic grievances in colonial America following the Proclamation of 1763. It wasn't just about land and rights, it was about money. Who had it, who didn't, and who was trying to take more than their fair share. Imagine you're a colonial merchant, trying to make an honest living trading goods between the colonies and the rest of the world. You're already dealing with high taxes and trade restrictions imposed by the British government, making it harder to turn a profit. And now, to add insult to injury, you're hit with the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act, two new taxes that hit you right in the pocketbook. But it's not just the merchants feeling the squeeze, it's everyone. Farmers, craftsmen, everyday folks trying to make ends meet. They're all feeling the pinch of British taxation. And what's worse, they're not even getting a say in how those taxes are being spent. No representation in Parliament means no voice in how their hard-earned money is being used. And let's not forget about the currency troubles. The British government's refusal to allow colonial governments to issue their own paper money left many colonists struggling to make ends meet. It was like a double whammy. Not only were they being taxed to the hilt, but they were also being forced to use currency that was increasingly hard to come by. So, what did they do? Well, they did what any self-respecting group of people would do in that situation. They protested. They refused to buy British goods. They petitioned their colonial assemblies for relief, and they even took to the streets in protest. Because they knew that their economic freedom was just as important as their political freedom, and they weren't about to let anyone take it away from them without a fight. Political unrest. Political unrest simmered beneath the surface in colonial America following the Proclamation of 1763, serving as a prelude to the eruption of rebellion that would define the American Revolution. The proclamation, issued by King George III, aimed to pacify indigenous nations and stabilize the frontier by restricting colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. However, this decree ignited a powder keg of discontent among American colonists, laying the groundwork for political turmoil and resistance. One of the primary sources of political unrest was the perceived infringement upon colonial liberties and rights. Colonists viewed the proclamation as a violation of their freedom to expand into the fertile lands beyond the Appalachians, which they saw as their birthright as English subjects. The imposition of arbitrary boundaries by a distant monarch fueled resentment and a growing sense of alienation from British authority. Moreover, the proclamation exacerbated existing tensions between colonial assemblies and British officials. Colonists increasingly questioned the legitimacy of British rule and asserted their rights to self-governance. The lack of representation in Parliament meant that colonists had little say in the laws and policies that affected their lives, leading to feelings of frustration and disenfranchisement. Economic grievances also fueled political unrest in colonial America. The British government's imposition of taxes and trade regulations, such as the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act, placed a heavy burden on colonists and stifled economic growth. Colonists argued that these measures violated their rights as English subjects and undermined their ability to prosper in the New World. In response to these grievances, colonists engaged in various forms of protest and resistance. Boycotts, protests, and acts of civil disobedience became increasingly common as colonists sought to challenge British authority and assert their rights. The proclamation served as a rallying cry for those who believed in the principles of freedom and self-determination, laying the foundation for the revolutionary sentiment that would ultimately lead to independence. In conclusion, political unrest under the backdrop of the Proclamation of 1763 was a key precursor to the American Revolution. The decree fueled discontent among American colonists, who viewed it as a direct assault on their liberties and rights. This unrest set the stage for rebellion, paving the way for the momentous events that would shape the course of American history. Seeds of Rebellion. The seeds of rebellion were sown deeply within colonial America in the wake of the Proclamation of 1763, fostering a growing sense of defiance and resistance that would ultimately blossom into the American Revolution. The Proclamation, which restricted colonial expansion beyond the Appalachian Mountains, catalyzed discontent among American colonists, igniting a fervent desire for autonomy and self-determination. One of the primary seeds of rebellion was the perceived infringement upon colonial liberties and rights. Colonists viewed the proclamation as a direct assault on their freedom to settle and prosper in the vast lands beyond the Appalachians. This arbitrary limitation imposed by a distant monarch fueled resentment and a growing sense of alienation from British authority, planting the seeds of defiance against perceived tyranny. Moreover, the proclamation exacerbated existing tensions between colonial assemblies and British officials. Colonists increasingly questioned the legitimacy of British rule and asserted their rights to self-governance. The lack of representation in Parliament meant that colonists had little say in the laws and policies that affected their lives, further fueling feelings of frustration and disenfranchisement. Economic grievances also played a significant role in nurturing the seeds of rebellion. The British government's imposition of taxes and trade regulations, such as the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act, placed a heavy burden on colonists and stifled economic growth. Colonists argued that these measures violated their rights as English subjects and undermined their ability to prosper in the New World, fostering resentment and a desire for independence. In response to these grievances, colonists engaged in various forms of protest and resistance. Boycotts, protests, and acts of civil disobedience became increasingly common as colonists sought to challenge British authority and assert their rights. The proclamation served as a rallying cry for those who believed in the principles of freedom and self-determination, nurturing the seeds of rebellion that would ultimately blossom into the American Revolution. The Road to Revolution. The road to revolution was paved with the grievances and aspirations of American colonists who sought to challenge British authority and assert their rights to self-governance. Following the Proclamation of 1763, which restricted colonial expansion and ignited widespread discontent, colonists embarked on a tumultuous journey toward rebellion that culminated in the American Revolution. The road to revolution was fraught with obstacles and challenges as colonists grappled with the injustices and infringements upon their liberties imposed by the British government. Economic grievances, such as the imposition of taxes and trade regulations without colonial representation in Parliament, fueled resentment and a desire for independence. The Stamp Act of 1765, which imposed a tax on all printed materials in the colonies, and the subsequent Townshend Acts, which levied duties on imported goods, further inflamed tensions and sparked widespread protests. Moreover, the lack of political representation exacerbated feelings of disenfranchisement among colonists, who viewed themselves as second-class citizens in the eyes of the British Crown. The cry of no taxation without representation became a rallying cry for those who sought to challenge British authority and assert their rights to self-determination. As the road to revolution unfolded, colonists increasingly turned to acts of defiance and resistance to express their discontent. Boycotts, protests, and acts of civil disobedience became commonplace as colonists sought to challenge British rule and assert their autonomy. The Boston Tea Party of 1773, in which colonists protested against the Tea Act by dumping British tea into Boston Harbor, exemplified the growing spirit of rebellion that permeated colonial America. Ultimately, the road to revolution culminated in the outbreak of armed conflict between colonial militias and British forces at Lexington and Concord in April 1775. The shot heard around the world marked the beginning of the American Revolution, as colonists took up arms in defense of their rights and liberties against British oppression. The road to revolution was long and arduous, but it ultimately led to the birth of a new nation founded on the principles of freedom, democracy, and self-determination. The Proclamation of 1763 and its aftermath served as a stark reminder of the power of dissent and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of oppression. It was a prelude to rebellion, a rallying cry for freedom, and a testament to the enduring legacy of those who dared to challenge the status quo and forge a new path toward independence. Thank you for watching the entire video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us. See you in the next video.